Hello, guys, and welcome back to I Bought a Microphone. I've been playing the Assassin's Creed series again, specifically Assassin's Creed Rogue, which has a lot of sailing in it, like Black Flag did, and there were some sea shanties in it. And I took a break from the Assassin's Creed series. I wasn't sure I was gonna go back. They went on sale on Steam, and I figured, what the hell, I'll pick up a game or two. If I never play it, it's like $10 out of my budget. Started playing Rogue, and I'm like, oh my god, I remember why I played the shit out of these games before. And we'll talk about Assassin's Creed on this podcast later. Because that is one thing that I love. And that's probably, if I had a favorite series of video games, the first one would be Siphon Filter on PlayStation, and the second one would be Assassin's Creed, which I've pretty much exclusively played on PC. But I mean, I play it with a controller, so it's basically like playing it on a console. But anyway, we'll have a conversation about Assassin's Creed another day. And oh, will we have a conversation? In that it will be me talking at you and you being unable to respond. Because that's how podcasting and recording works. I don't know if you guys really understand that. So the last time that we met, I was talking about role-playing games yet again. And we were having a serious talk about the mechanics of role-playing games, how they work, and the things that, the reasons that I think that the things that they do and the systems that they use are cool. And I was touching on Vampire the Masquerade and why I thought it was great. So now I'm going to seriously get into Vampire the Masquerade. Like you thought I was nerdy before, we're going to get even nerdier. So I mentioned Kindred the Embraced, which, if you have not IMDb'd that shit since the last time that we talked, I think you should. It's a ridiculous series. It breaks a lot of the rules of the fucking system that it pretends to be based on. However, it's pretty fucking cool. Just because a lot of the, TV shows from that time weren't really trying anything. It was all just about tried and true formulas. And a show about vampires based on a fucking nerdy ass role playing game. That was a pretty ballsy move. Alright. What is Vampire the Masquerade and why should I care? Well, let me start just as basic as I can. And, okay. So the concept of the Vampire Masquerade is what's called the World of Darkness. Alright? So, imagine today's world. The world that you and I all live in. Alright? And below that, in a kind of in the shadows, in the darkness, lies a bunch of ancient beings that are pulling the strings of a bunch of puppets out there. So let's say, for example, Trump didn't become president by himself. He became president because some ancient vampire in the background pulled a lot of strings to make sure that all of these things aligned so that he became president. That's just sort of the basic concept. But basically, There's the world that you and I all live in, the world of daylight and police officers and ice cream cones and fucking fast food and who gives a shit. There's all of that, but there is another world that lies beneath that, filled with shadowy creatures and, those that would feast on humankind. So that's the basic concept of Vampire the Masquerade. We're just starting to explain it to you. That's where it starts. It's our world. It's the world that you and I all live in. But imagine that instead of, rich billionaires pulling the strings in the background, it's actually fucking vampires who have lived for thousands of years and have learned to manipulate mankind. That's kind of where we're starting from. So it's it's kind of neat. It's kind of cool. So I mentioned, I think in the last one, sex. So there's the Camarilla, which is one sect, S-E-C-T, sect. And then there's the Sabbat, which are a sect. And then there's several independent vampires that are not part of any sect. The main thrust, the main background of Vampire the Masquerade is biblical. They draw from Genesis, Cain, and Abel. First brothers, the first murder. Cain slays Abel, and he is marked from thenceforth cursed. Cain, first vampire. He goes out into the world. He creates a city with 3 progeny children. Those children beget 13 other progeny. Cain fucks off. He's done with humankind and vampires. Vampires have lorded over humans for hundreds of years. The 13 children that Cain's children created slay their parents. The second generation is gone. The third generation of kindred vampires create the clans that we come to know and love in the Vampire the Masquerade game. So there's basically 13 variety of vampires that we can become. They all trace their origins back to Cain, the first vampire. So several hundreds of years later, we find ourselves on the edge of, the end of the world? Nobody really knows. The original 13 progenitors of the original 13 clans, those head vampires, called antediluvians, some have been destroyed, some have gone into hiding, many have been asleep for decades, if not centuries. There is a fear that when those antediluvians wake, they will destroy the world, essentially. Because they are so ancient and powerful, they will not be able to be contained. So, that's where we're starting from. And already it's, insane, right? Because that's pretty cool, that whole backstory. And I mean, I glossed over a lot of other stuff, but we'll get into a bit more detail. But that's Vampire the Masquerade. That's the type of shit like I was. So we're taking ancient folklore and we're like putting it in today's world and we're spinning it on its head. Like obviously this was originally designed in the days before smartphones. So perhaps it's not as feasible today as it was back then. But back in those days, there weren't no fucking cell phones where you could record a whole mess of shit. And even if there was, you know, what does that matter really? There's a million videos on YouTube, and oh, this one claims to be a vampire that you saw at one point. Oh, it's photoshopped. Oh, I could do that on my, MacBook Pro. This is totally fake news. So who's to say what we're actually seeing in the world of darkness with our smartphones? But that was, back in the day, back in the 90s, when this game was invented, it was easier to get away with this type of stuff. So essentially, vampires are in the universe, the world of darkness that was created, are a supernatural being that is born of a human that has died and been fed vampire blood. The embrace that is referred to in the title of Kindred the Embraced is what it's called when a human is made into a vampire. Supposedly, in this world, when the fangs enter the flesh of a human being, a magical connection takes place, and it's close to ecstasy for the human who's being consumed. And most vampires try not to kill their victims. They try to feed on them enough so that they can sustain themselves and that the human doesn't die. And a run of the tongue up the wound that the vampire caused with his teeth will heal the wound so that the human doesn't bleed to death. That's licking the wound. That's the Vampire the Masquerade folklore, and we live with it. Because, who wants to kill humans every time they go out? So, there are the 13 original clans, which I'm going to touch on as briefly as I can because I want to get to why I love this game. So there's the Camarilla, alright, and they're made up of 7 clans. There's the Bruja, who are the anarchists, the rebels. They want to change the world, want to not be, controlled by other people, but at the same time, they don't want to not be destroyed by all the humans. Alright? There are the Toreador, who are the lovers, the artists. They see beauty in everything, including death, and they want nothing more than to be a part of it. There's the Malkavians, who are insane, literally. The gift of the embrace grants them with a particular insanity, whether it be OCD or multiple personality disorder or, schizophrenia or whatever it is. They're vampires who are gifted with insanity. There are the Tremere, which are blood wizards. They use the power of the vampire blood to create magical effects. There are the Ventru, who are the aristocrats. Some see themselves as the leaders of the Camarilla. They are the ones who put themselves above others. They have the ability to manipulate people's minds. There are the Gangrel, who are some might say, feral vampires. They are the ones that are most in touch with the animalistic side of the vampires, um, of the vampires being. And then there are the Nosferatu, who are the monstrous looking vampires. When they become vampires, they turn into, well, you've seen the movie Nosferatu, or you've seen the movie Shadow of a Vampire, or, like the bald vampires with the pointy ears and the buck teeth and the fangs and like, not pretty at all. And they tend to shun regular society. But they live underground, and they are known usually as the Masters of Secrets. So, if you live in the world of darkness, if you're going to come in contact with a vampire and not die, you're most likely going to come in contact with one of those 7 clans. The Camarilla, who are made up by those type of vampires, live by a code, which is the Masquerade, where the name comes from, Vampire the Masquerade, which is basically a couple of tenets that they live by. Basically can be boiled down to: we don't make vampires unless we have permission. We don't kill people unless we absolutely need to preserve our anonymity. We try to blend into society as much as possible. That's basically how it breaks down. The Masquerade is these series of vampires who are living amongst us normal humans and are trying to blend in, trying to feed on them enough to sustain themselves, but not to decimate the human population, and not to be known by the humans, to be, part of the fabric of human life, and even maybe are, powerful members of human society. And, if not, of the local government, they are at least influential members of the community who lobby the local government and things like that. They try to find ways to keep themselves useful. So to steer humanity in the proper direction, which is basically away from killing vampires. There's another sect, which is the Sabbat, which I think I mentioned both of these the last time. And the Sabbat is made up of 3 clans, 3 of the original clans of vampires. The first is the La Sombra, who are like the Ventrue, they want to control everything. But unlike the Ventrue, who choose to be more subtle and, manipulate people's minds, the La Sombra tend to prefer to terrify their, would-be controlled people. Their powers are manipulating shadows and creating, monstrous things out of the shadows, or just turning the shadows against the people. It's all about terror and dread with the La Sombra. And then there's the Tzimisce. I'm sorry, it's not 3, it's 2 with them, the 2 main clans. So there's the La Sombra, the Shadow Fuckers, and then there's the Tzimisce, who are the Romanian vampires. And their whole main thing, also pretty closely tied into terror, is flesh crafting. They have the ability to mend flesh and bone and change its shape and appearance and function. So they can create bony spires from a person, and they can meld their flesh to look to a different appearance. They can even turn themselves into horrible, grotesque monsters at high enough levels. And then they have below them lesser versions of the 7 vampires that I mentioned before. But those are the 2 leading classes, are the Lasombra and the Tzimisce. And then there are 4 independent vampire clans. There's the followers of Set, who are descended from, well, the ancient Egyptians are descended from them, I should say. And they are all about corruption. They're all about corrupting humanity and other vampires, and where there are people dealing drugs and running prostitution, you will find a follower of Set's. There are the Giovanni, who are literally a mafia family of vampires. Like, they are a mafia family that goes back centuries, and the only people that have been embraced in this clan are members of the Italian family. There are actually offshoots of the Giovanni that are not vampires at all. There's whole stratuses of them that are human, hoping to one day be embraced. So, yeah, it's structured very much like a mafia syndicate, where the Don, the antediluvian at the top, is Giovanni himself. Supposedly, though it could just be shadows and whispers and people who are doing things in his name. Nobody knows exactly. There are the Ravenos, who are the gypsy vampires. They are tricksters and rovers, and they don't believe in the truth. They don't believe in anything, really. They want only to be, left alone and to fuck with people, basically. Their essential magical characteristic as vampires is creating illusions and chicanery. And, perhaps their only real goal is to survive. What's to come next? And lastly, the last of the 13 vampires. Wow, this is not a quick conversation, is it? The last of the 13 vampires are Assamites. The Assamites are typically Arabian, Middle Eastern, Indian, that whole general area. Traditionally, they are the assassins of the vampire world. It's, for the most part, faux pas to kill another kindred, another vampire. But there are times when it is necessary, when your plans interfere with mine, in order to try to do things more anonymously than others. That's when we would reach out to the Assamite clan. And they were one time unable to drink the blood of vampires, which is extremely potent. They have since been able to overcome that curse and are incredibly susceptible to being addicted to vampire blood, which, as I said, was potent and can add bonus powers, but also can lead you towards the dark side. Alright, so that's just... So these 13 clans, the 4 independent ones, Assamite, Followers of Set, Ravenos, and Giovanni, the 2 Sabbat clans, the Lasombra and the Tzimisce, and the various vampires that lie underneath them, and then the Camarilla, the Bruja, the Malkavian, the Gangrel, the Toreador, the Ventru, the Tremere, and the Nosferatu. All of these different clans have different goals and different plots that they have set throughout the world of darkness. You, as a character in this world, which is typically a vampire of the younger set, are trying to just get by, trying to exist in this world of darkness, and trying not to get caught too deeply into the machinations of the vampires above you. Or, on the other hand, you are trying to dive deeper into the machinations of the vampires above you, trying to usurp them and take control of your own world and to project your own goals on the future. The interesting thing about this game is that they have what is called the humanity system. Alright? So, as a vampire of the Camarilla, you are trying to do as little damage as possible. And also, as someone who is formerly human, like, typically when you start the game, you've been a vampire for no more than 20, 30 years. So you still remember what it was like to be a flesh and blood person. You know, you haven't been alive for hundreds of years to where you forget what it was like to have blood pumping through your veins and stuff like that. The whole point of the humanity trait is that as a vampire, you are forced to do heinous acts. You're forced to attack people and feed on their blood. You can try to seduce them into allowing you to do this, but still at the same time, you are taking something from them. You are taking their life essence. You are raping them from a particular standpoint. So, the higher you are up on humanity, the less you can take the strains of these horrific acts that you perform. The trick is, though, if you are just going to be a monster and do horrible things, which you can do if that's what you want to do, you descend deeper into what is called the beast, which, when you become a vampire, you don't just stay yourself and live forever. A demon takes residence in your body, which is personified as the beast. The animalistic nature that everyone has within them and within vampires is even more powerful. So when you do horrible things, the beast rises up within you. And if you can fight him off, if you can manage to hold him back, you can retain your humanity. And you can live your life as a vampire indefinitely. But if you can't fight him off, then you fall farther and farther away from where you started from your humanity. So the older vampires, the ones who have lived for hundreds of years, tend to have lower humanities. They tend to be better at resisting their darker urges, but they have less capacity to understand regular humans and also to appear human. If you want to wander the streets, you know, in a big city like San Francisco or New York, you're not going to have a huge problem. A lot of people not going to notice you. But if you're in Louisiana, out in the Podunks, out in Bon Ton, I mean, and you're walking around with no blood flowing through your skin, pale, white as a sheet, as they say, people might notice that. Closer you are to human, the more of your humanity you've retained, the less of the vampire you've let take control of you, the easier it is for you to appear human, to blend in with humans. But also, there's another side to this. You can't just say, you know, fuck it, I don't want to blend in with humans. I'll just do the darkest, most horrible shit that comes to me, because what does it matter? I'm going to live forever. And the problem with that is, if you don't control yourself, if you succumb to the beast and let him take over, you lose your humanity. And you become a threat to the masquerade. And the other vampires around you will hunt you and destroy you to keep themselves safe. So the game, at its deepest, most interesting levels, you could play it fast and loose if you want to, and that's usually how I play it. I mean, we worry about frenzy occasionally, which is when the beast takes over. But for the most part, you know, as long as you don't do anything too horrible, you know, and we're talking about, you know, just killing somebody for the fun of it, that's something you're going to have to roll your humanity for, because that ain't cool, bro. But, you know, jaywalking or, you know, stealing something, that's not something you're going to have to worry about losing too much humanity over. But eventually you're going to have to feed, is the point. Vampires cannot subsist on human food, and actually in this universe, if they eat human food, they immediately start to regurgitate it, along with a lot of blood. So in order to sustain yourself, you have to subsist on humans. But you have to balance your need for blood with your humanity and also the masquerade. I mean, if you don't really care about humans, if you're a cold-blooded motherfucker, you can choose to just kill as many humans as you want to keep yourself alive. But you have to keep in mind that the masquerade exists, and there are other vampires out there who will punish you if you start just leaving a pile of dead bodies behind you. But I think even more interesting is to play the character as a human who is suddenly, or not so suddenly, gradually forced to do horrible things in order to keep themselves alive. Like, if you think about it, if you had to feed on another person to keep yourself alive, how would you approach that situation? And assuming you had a number of magical powers at your disposal. So let's think about it for a minute. Perhaps you might have the ability to wipe someone's memory. Alright? So you go at them forcefully, right? You perhaps use a little charm, seduce them, get them by themselves, and then you attack them, you feed on them, you take their blood, not enough to kill them, but enough so that you're sustained, and then you wipe their memory of the entire event. They remember nothing. Alright? That's one way you might go about it. There's another way. As a vampire, a magical creature, you have the ability to twist people's minds. You can make them be attracted to you. You can lure them to you. You can draw people towards you who will be, and manipulate their brains so that they're more willing to succumb to you than others. And in that case, you draw them away, and they willingly let you feed on them. Alright? Other ways that we can do this. We can turn ourselves into a bat. We can fly around a park waiting for some homeless person to appear. We can attack them. We can feed on them. We can suck as much as we can before they bat us away. And then we fly off into the darkness. So many different ways you can approach this situation, but at the same time you have to deal with your conscience. You have to deal with the fact that you are taking something from somebody in order to keep yourself sustained. And that's the part about the game that always interests me. Like, we never really got to explore it too much. I mean, I was always about super deep layered plots. Like, the first plot that I ever, like, the first game, literally, that I ever created, and this was, I didn't plot out a lot of it, but it was all up here in my head. I populated the world with, it took place in New Orleans, and the entire city was shrouded in mist. Morning, noon, and night, there was mist. And if you drove out of the boundaries of New Orleans, like if you literally drove from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, as soon as you left the boundaries of New Orleans, the mist would break. And you'd look behind you and you'd see the city of New Orleans shrouded in mist. And the characters that I had populated the city with were a number of the higher ranking vampires in the area, but not, necessarily the most powerful. And there was a horrid green monster that was wandering around the city. Had the body of a woman with the breasts and everything. Face was all messed up and gnashing teeth, and I never really got to the big climax of that story, unfortunately. But that green horrid monster was a woman that had been killed there decades before by some terrible people and had thrown a curse over the city, and that was what the mist was all about. And eventually they were going to be able to exorcise her spirit, or, if not exorcise her spirit, they were going to be able to fulfill her dying wish. And, there's always multiple ways to attack a problem. And by fulfilling the dying wish, they were going to lift the mist from the city, which was, of course, going to make it a lot harder for the other vampires who would live there, because they were used to having the mist to rely on during the day, because the vampires in this world are susceptible to sunlight, so there's that. But that would have been an interesting twist to put into it, too. So that was Vampire the Masquerade. Like, that's... Oh, God, you have no idea how much longer I could talk about this. But I think, again, the main interest, the tagline, the quote that's from one of the original books is a modern storytelling game of personal horror. And that's what has always interested me about the game, is the concept of a vampire living in the regular world and being forced to do horrible things against their will to survive. I mean, assuming that you didn't choose to be a vampire, perhaps it was forced upon you. Now you have to feed on others to survive. You don't have a choice. If you don't feed on other people, you fall into a coma. It's called torpor. And, if you don't fall into a coma in a deep, dark tunnel, then you'll fall into a coma on the street, and as soon as the sunlight hits you, you burn and you die. Or somebody catches you and takes you to a hospital and discovers that you're not quite human. And they have a number of questions for you. You manage to escape that situation, but then the vampire overlords of the neighborhood that you live in want to talk to you because you just betrayed the masquerade. You just revealed the existence of vampires to other people. Like, there's a lot of interesting things, interesting ways you can go with it. And I recommend that you check it out if you haven't. I don't know anything about the newer editions of it, to be fair. The stuff that I'm talking about is the second and third edition. That's where I hit my money shot right there. They kept moving the storyline along, which I found problematic because part of the storyline is the end of the world. And I don't know, it's kind of hard to move the story along to the end of the world and then keep having a game. So, the games that I'm talking about, the editions anyway, the second and third predated the Millennium, which of course, a lot of stuff leading up to the Millennium was supposed to be, apocalyptic and the end of the world is coming, and that's part of the stuff that they fed into. So, thought it was interesting, that part of it. I even played a little bit with that in the stories that I created. Storyteller is the name of the guy who runs the game in a vampire game, unlike Game Master in Pathfinder or Shadowrun or Dungeon Master in D&D, pretty much exclusively. If you're a Dungeon Master, you're running D&G. So that's Vampire the Masquerade. If you have any more questions about role-playing games in general or anything, look me up on Facebook or, hit me up on this. Just drop something in the comments and I'll find it. I really recommend that you check it out if you haven't, and if you're interested in trying something, as always, I'm fucking game for whatever. So if you want to try something that you haven't really tried before and you want to check it out, let me know, and I'll I have no problem running a game especially for newbies. That's always fun. It's good times. There will be some reading and learning involved, but I will make it as minimal as possible. I will give you the bare minimum that you need to learn to play the game, and I'll do everything else. That's just if that happens to come up. Otherwise, we're going to move on. Next week will be something not about role-playing games. I don't know what it is yet. Maybe Assassin's Creed, maybe not. I might finally do that movie review I've been talking about with my brother. We'll see how it all shakes out. Until then, as always, I fucking love you guys, and thanks for coming out, coming back, and God, I appreciate you still listening to me after all this time. Like, I can't even tell you. It's got... Obviously, I'm not doing this for, financial reward. I'm doing this because it's nice to be heard. See you next time.